I wanted to start off, just anybody on the panel that wants to talk about, what are some of the things that you are looking for to kind of help any project that you're going to do be successful? Like what specific things, and what do you sometimes see that is missing from the table that you have to help kind of come in and fill in that maybe some of your clients don't always understand?
I think from a creative side, it's really determining what's that story we're telling for them, what is the overarching brand experience. So from a retail lens, it's what is the customer's journey, and at what point in the customer's journey are we touching them, and when are we telling that story, and how are we capturing their attention emotionally? So when it relates to VR or AR, it's within the customer journey's their path. At what point do they use the technology to augment the choices that they're making, and how do you better their choices and give them the amount of information that they need so they can make the correct choice for themselves?
Okay. I'll speak from the sales perspective. I had a grocery chain who takes digital orders. So you like place the order at home, and then you go and you pick it up if you're a mom with kids and you don't have time to like shop. They use this technology to try to cut down the amount of physical assets that they need to put into a store, so that right now, close to the entrance and exits, they're putting these big refrigeration units because it takes a long time, or there's the SLA is like 2 hours from the time you place the order to the time you come and pick it up. If they could push that down to like 15, 20 minutes, then you can...
Please explain SLA for the audience.
Oh, service level agreement, right? So you press submit on an order, and then they, as a company, have 2 hours to fulfill that order, or else, you get a discount on your order. So if they could make that time smaller to 15 or 20 minutes, that would take out the refrigeration units that they're having to put into each of these brick and mortar stores. And to why this is important, the guys who actually run around the store to fulfill the orders, essentially, they've got a handheld, like PDA type of device. And with this, they're freeing up both hands, and they're using some IR scanning technology to basically be able to look at what they're trying to find and do multiple orders at one time.
Cool.
Well, for us, a lot of the VR and AR content from the marketing side, we have what we think is a very beautiful campus. Anybody's welcome. I have business cards to come and tour the campus if you'd like to see Chapman University. Otherwise, put on one of these headsets and you can virtually tour the campus and you kind of see what it feels like. We like to do a little bit more international recruiting for prospective students, so we want to do a lot on the Pacific Rim, and then of course things even just back east and stuff like that. For people who can't come to campus and tour the campus and see it, we like to provide these opportunities for people to see it in a more virtual context.
And how did that perform?
And how does it perform? Yeah, it does well. We're in the beginning now. I would say it's almost too soon to do a lot of the measurements. Right now we're doing more 360 video on YouTube and Facebook, and those engagement numbers are really good. So if we look at it from a content marketing perspective, it's a different type of content that we can still share. As we all know as marketers, if you're sharing the same type of content, you're always sharing pictures or you're always sharing blog posts, there comes a point where there's maybe a fatigue. So we look at 360 video as an opportunity to share something different, and those engagement numbers really compete with the traditional video numbers that we do. Okay. As far as conversions, we're considering if we're going to continue to do this stuff in-house or if we're going to partner with a company called UVisit, who specializes has always specialized in virtual campus tours and is now bringing VR and AR to their platform. And that actually is a package already built in with CTAs built in and everything like that, so we can convert more tactically.
Cool. John, I'd love to hear from you. And you mentioned you create worlds, not reality. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and what that means, because to some people that might not mean much until you explain a little deeper.
Right. Well, okay. Going back 20 years, and some of the movies that, maybe, sort of captured the idea of virtual reality that we had then, things like Tron and Lawnmower Man. The first real step into virtual reality was on online worlds, MMORPGs, EverQuest, Ultima Online, World of Warcraft, and those were the massive multiplayer online games where people actually lived inside online worlds. On the other hand, there were a couple of worlds, Second Life and Entropia Universe, and these were slightly less gamified, but a little bit more focused on the true value of your avatar as a reflection of you. The world that I was involved in from the very beginning was called Entropia Universe, and it was the first one that was built with a real cash economy from the outset. So that meant that everything that you did inside that world had a real value and would reflect in your wallet, okay? So for me, that was virtual reality. And my aspiration at the very beginning was to be able to make a living in virtual reality, which I was remarkably actually successful in doing. So in all of the next decade, I've always referred to that as virtual reality. But today, finally, the technology to really immerse oneself in virtual reality with, the HTC Vive and the Oculus and all the other things, the HoloLens and the Magic Leap is actually coming into pass. So that's the virtual reality I think that we've all dreamed of. So my thing with marketing has been to try to reach people and get them to think about the value of their time, okay? And it's actually a lot harder to do, to achieve, than you would think. We've seen all digital gaming has been so immersive that people have just blown hundreds of millions of hours around the world unproductively. And it's great fun, and developers develop more and more immersive games that are literally designed to take as much of your life as possible. So anyway, from a marketing standpoint, I've been working very hard to reach people and actually make them think about what they get out of their time inside virtual reality.
I was going to ask Brian if he could explain. I don't want to assume that everyone knows the difference between AR and VR, but maybe you could explain the difference for everybody.
So from a creative standpoint, AR is the introduction of a digital plane into the real environment, whereas VR is the introduction of the environment in a digital plane. So it's like the reverse of it. You have a headset on, you're completely within that environment, whereas in AR, you have the real world and you're layering on top of that. I think the best example of that is Pokemon Go. When that became huge, it had an augmented reality component to it, which was fairly simple. It just put little monsters in the world in front of you using your phone as a viewfinder. And we love to build that kind of creative, immersive environment in VR in which you're kind of taking yourself out of it. And we're seeing a lot of companies like Discovery who is using this to their advantage and to actually bring a positive light to virtual reality. So creating a way to educate children by bringing them to a place they might not be able to access, and then telling stories through virtual reality. Whereas augmented reality, you can take the world that you can already see around you and then add a layer of information on top of that.
So I'm going to make this really real. I'm going to play the client right now. I have the same amount of budget. I'm not sure whether to go VR or AR. You know where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah. Well,
what's the difference?
It depends. What kind of client are you? What category?
Well, let's forget about the specifics, but in general, are we talking, and I know the answer, but I want you to answer the way you think, but VR versus AR, are we talking the same price? If not, what's the difference in the timeline to make that happen?
So for VR, the production is a lot higher because the way we would do a traditional photo shoot is we have staging, styling, and you have your camera set up, your lighting set up. If you're shooting a true VR, if we're not going to go into a CG world, we're going to do it like real time. We're going to use cameras. We're going to use like a Ricoh Theta S, or we're going to use a 1080p 6-rig GoPro, or even go to the high end. You now have to take into account a lot of other elements in the environment that you have to start to control now. You can't light it the same way you would light photography.
Before we get lost in the weeds, yes. You're saying which one's more expensive or takes longer?
VR.
And why is that?
just because of the production level that goes into creating those immersive environments.
And why? So I kind of thought the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, but I was wondering. You're talking
We can
about.
build on-
Are we talking including all the science and all the like tech and all the integration that has to happen on the back end?
I would say from like a device situation, I think they're kind of balanced because you have your viewfinders in your phone, or you have your Oculus Rift, or you could even go Google Cardboard if you want to go on the low end. Whereas AR, you can build on a few platforms where even if you're building on a VR platform, you still have to produce all that extra level of content. And that's where I would see the cost coming in from a creative standpoint.
So you're saying that you rely more on the existing world and maybe just like decorate it versus creating everything from scratch. That's
Exactly.
the difference.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. So when is a good time to use or not use VR? When is it time to be like, okay, this is exactly what you should be doing versus not? Who wants to take that?
I'll take a stab at it. Imagine you're a customer, right? Or you've got your own business, and a lot of this, the function of marketing and the function of sales is to create a great experience with the brand that you've established and with the products that you're shipping. The traditional model of going to a brick and mortar and having nice salespeople, or going online and having a very cool website is very hard to differentiate. So I see this technology, whether it's AR or VR, as a new way to create experiences for customers that they might, they probably haven't seen. There's probably a small percentage of the general population that has been exposed to either AR or VR. So similar to when the App Store on iPhone first came out, there's like 30 or 40 apps. So I feel like the first mover advantage, if you can get in quick enough, you have an opportunity to differentiate yourself amongst maybe your peers in market. But you've got to understand your business really, really well to know whether the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars that you're going to put into it you can recoup in the short term, or is that kind of a longer term thing, or is it just a branding thing?
On the subject of VR, I think that if you need to make an emotional impact on your customer, then that's the way to go, because you can control the environment, and you can it's all about immersiveness. And whereas obviously AR, which is incredible and definitely more widely accessible, it's not necessarily as emotionally impactful. So that's probably a good starting point.
Okay. And do you guys find that either of these technologies, from a marketing standpoint, would they be better as an introduction to a brand, or once you have them as a customer to delight them? Or maybe both, but like when would you use it, each of those tactics?
I'd say both. I know for us at the university, we see it as an opportunity to connect with a population and demographic that is that we want to connect with, and it might be a new type of content that they're interested in VR, that maybe there are people who are, they have a Google Cardboard or they have a VR headset and they're looking for content to consume. So they stumble upon some of Chapman University's stuff, and then they're introduced to the university that way. But you're right that there may be, key moments where it makes sense to make that really emotional connection. We did a 360 video for commencement last year, and it really was an emotional impact for the alumni, because people, especially who graduated somewhat recently, think back to their commencement day and how it felt to walk across that stage and everything like that. So that was a good opportunity for us to engage with alumni. A lot of people think our original target audience is prospective students, 15, 16, 17-year-olds and their parents. So it can be, I think both is the right answer.
Yeah, and just on another note, I think engagement as well as emotional impact. I think if you want to create a lasting engagement, well, you can do it in both AR and VR, depending on if you're gamifying stuff. But by gamifying in either medium, you can create a very lasting relationship, which can be very valuable.
Yeah, I think with AR, you can grow a lot of excitement through the peripheral itself, because with like the HoloLens, it can be applied to other things, and I think a lot of retailers are kind of attracted to the idea of like a magic mirror or some sort of virtual wall that kind of allows the customer to interact with their lineup of apparel without having to stock that apparel, like you said with the grocery store. So it's how people or technologists take the idea of AR and apply it to other peripherals and other things within an environment. And for some brick and mortars, that's really exciting. Regardless of how many stores they have, they know that they're keeping their customers in the tangible world and they're not pulling them out into a virtual reality. Whereas on the flip side, they can also create storytelling environments in virtual reality that immerses a customer in the world of whatever they're trying to sell.
Yeah, so just to add to that, have you guys been to a Tesla factory or a Tesla showroom before? Anybody out there? Take a car or something that's really, really complex under the hood. I think both of these technologies allow you to take something that's complex and help people to understand it a little bit more. And if you're already a fan of it, understanding that product at a deeper level kind of gives you that emotional attachment maybe to it, and maybe will allow you to sell. Maybe the dad is a fan, but they are having their troubles trying to convince the children or the next generation.
So the other influencers down the pipe.
Correct. So I think that you have the opportunity with the technology to demystify a lot of things.
Yeah, I've seen amazing stuff with AR on that front, where you can look under the hood and suddenly every piece of the engine will come to life for you. So instead of having to read a manual, right, it's actually a fully interactive manual. It's very powerful.
And a lot of the way that we learn, like I'm a visual learner, so everybody grew up with a chalkboard and a teacher with 20, 30 students in the class. I think it caters to different learning styles and will allow engagement in a classroom or in any setting where you're trying to digest some content or learn something new. It gives the visual learners and the folks who just don't magically, get it from a book. This is another medium where you can
more of an experience versus like passively reading about it.
Yeah.
So David, you mentioned some of the tools that you're using. You mentioned Google Expeditions. I was curious how you're using on the educational front. So we're talking about sexy marketing stuff. Let's talk about how we can use it in other situations. Maybe a factory that has a very big machine. I'm thinking like Caterpillar has like all these different tractors, and like I don't know how many gears even one of those giant tractors the size of this building would have. But I could imagine this would be a great use. But any of those kind of like maybe B2B, less sexy kind of applications that maybe you've done or think about? Anybody?
All my applications are a little bit more sexy. I think we really had fun with AR in kind of gamification roles. So we launched a brick and mortar store for New Balance in the Flatiron District in 2011. And we worked with a digital agency to kind of create a promotion around that. And it was kind of rudimentary when you look back at it, but it was really, you were trying to find a virtual reality baton, and all these people in New York that had this app had a virtual reality baton, or one person would have it, and all you had to do is use your phone as the viewfinder to find that person and steal it from them, and then come back to the store to actually get a real gold baton or a pair of shoes. And so it was a marketing tactic to drive PR, but it was a very simple idea, and it still had some sort of like gamification quality to it that made it very fun. But on the flip side, if you have like an automotive, you can layer on that level of information and education in AR, which is really exciting to clients because it's something they want to say everything, and it gives them a platform to actually say everything, but we can also hide those layers.
Right, so go ahead.
Yeah, there's a level of, for some of my less sexy accounts, right? If they're in manufacturing or they make like pieces of aircraft, for example, there's a lot of regulation that stipulates how much training or what level of like classification an individual might have. And imagine going through like hundreds of pages of documents and then taking a test to certify that you know that, versus loading up something on here and being able to physically interact with it and get that same amount of understanding in less time. You're saving your employer money, which turns into dollars and more productivity for you after you've cleared the certification and are actually doing what they pay you to do. So, a lot of manufacturer type of companies are looking at that kind of thing to put on the shop floor or to put, as part of their training.
That's great. So this segues in kind of where I wanted to go next, which is really capturing data points, and those dimensions. On marketing hand, you can start to see maybe intent. And my example would be like if we're in this room, maybe that podium is something valuable to the user, and it means like, if they're hanging on that podium, that means it's connecting to our brand, whatever that might be. And if they go through that door, maybe it's gated, literally gated, like you have to pay to get through that door to enter a whole other experience. Maybe it's a world, and we're stuck in a reality, right? Whatever. You make it like more tasty. So a lot of different ways to play with that marketing-wise. I want to know, how do you capture that data? And in the case of what you mentioned, like when it's something practical, how do you do like scoring that this worker did a good job, or did he mess up, or how many times they have to do it? So you start to see like patterns and start to see a data algorithm on performance. Anybody?
I guess I'll try to start. So the way you have to build applications which sit on VR or AR. And the way that you build those applications, you're monitoring kind of what the user is doing, whether that's kind of how they're moving their head, or if you've built a virtual world, kind of what pieces of it they're interacting with the most. In terms of like how to collect data, I think,
Somebody, if you can move your hand, I think it's right there. There you just move your hand, and I think it's motion.
Awesome. So how to collect data, I think you need to work backwards from what your desired outcome is, because the way that you build the application will depend a lot on kind of what data is important to you versus what's not important to you. So if you build this world and you don't care how much people are interacting with different elements, then you're not going to build a kind of feedback mechanism into the application to do that.
So then if we have a set of goals and they're ranked from top priority to lowest, how does that maybe influence the video branching, so to speak, or the story branching that you're going to do on any point?
So in the storytelling realm, we still have kind of similar metrics. It's almost kind of like the old school web way. It's like, what are the click-throughs? What are the eyeballs we're seeing? And in virtual reality, you can track objects. So you can track what they're looking at or what their intent is. You can also track click-through. So when we're adapting our storytelling in the virtual reality world, it's, what part of the narrative or nonlinear narrative are they really interacting with? And what do we need to change? Whether that's language, it's aesthetics, or, it's just the environment, noise, and sound. Like, those are things that we can kind of not organically change, but we can go back and look at and maybe alter to get better interaction. In the
You mean influence?
In influence, yeah. And same with AR. You can track what people are looking at. You can track the objects. And you can track the click-through. It has the same qualities in an e-commerce realm. If they're clicking on a project or a product within the AR, it's the same as them clicking within an e-commerce. So you can still take similar metrics, but from a creative standpoint, we're just taking those reports and then adapting the creative.
So I think about digital marketing, and I think of a one-dimensional line, right, moving across space. And I think about the volume space of a 3D space.
Yep.
All the data points, X, Y, Z, right?
It's infinite, yeah.
Right?
It's
so
infinite versus one.
What does that look like? I mean, I'm actually really want to know a little more tactical. Like, what are we talking? How do you capture that data? What does that really look like? And where does that get stored? And how do you access it and really segment the data?
One of the things that we're working on at the university for the marketing department is the idea of an augmented reality campus tour. So our admission office is open from 8 to 5 when a lot of students are in school and adults are at work. So there are times where people want to come after 5 o'clock on the weekdays, or maybe Saturday and Sunday, to visit the tour. And this isn't something that's live yet. We're still kind of working it out and brainstorming. But we're working with another Chapman incubator program called Well Told. Their website is welltold.io. And the idea is that people would be able to come to campus, look through their phone, and interact with different parts of campus. So part of the way we could kind of glean data and learn more about our audiences is knowing about the types of people that come to this augmented reality campus tour, what buildings they go to look at, what do they spend more time on. You know, if they go to the film school and they spend a lot of time looking at the Foley room, and they don't spend any time really looking at the production design facilities, then we know that in the future we could market to those people, send specific types of communication or specific type of publication to them.
Have you been doing that, or that's in the roadmap?
That's in the roadmap. Yeah.
And honest question, why is it really like a big deal to implement this? Is it going to be a monster thing or not that big of a deal?
Well, I think as far as workload, it might be a little bit of a monster thing, but we do think that it's something that could be beneficial, and for us, it's kind of the ROI, since we're really supporting a lot of our student groups, like Well Told. Since our investment is a little bit lower, we're supporting this incubator program. It makes sense for us to do it because, you know, we're not having to fork over a whole ton of money to do it. By the way, if anybody out there wants the same benefit, Vigo or Well Told, you can hire them and support Chapman students and get a really good deal for your company.
They're in the heartland. No. So, and I will say, David and Brian, you kind of, I wouldn't say had opposing thoughts, but, you know, on one hand, you're saying get out there and just do it. Grab a Rico and just start shooting. You're saying, I think audience is a little bit more sophisticated. They want to be entertained. You know,
they are.
Let's talk about that. And I do want to open up for questions after this question, but go ahead.
And there's different levels of production, but I would say depending on what your category is, if you're a very sophisticated high-end fashion retailer, you're going to want a much more polished piece. And so that means you're going to take the time to do the post-production. You're going to take the time to do the pre-planning, the storytelling, the storyboards, the styling, and lighting, makeup, and all that. And then there are going to be other times where it has to be quick and dirty, because we are getting to a time where we can actually broadcast 360-degree video. You're not going to have that same amount of control in those. So it really depends on the client and the category. One thing about your data that you were talking about is you'd be surprised, a lot of major retailers are still kind of dipping their toes into both virtual reality and augmented reality. So they're only doing very rudimentary tracking for data. So they're just like, how many times have someone viewed it? Sure. And how many times have they clicked on it? They don't really go that deep yet.
And that's that's what I want to know. Is it that they don't know they can, or they just don't want to deal with it yet, or?
I just don't think they're ready to deal with it yet, because that's a whole matrix of data that they now have to deal with on top of their SEO, their CRM, and all the other kind of KPIs that they're dealing with. So now you're just adding a new layer to them because you came up with a really fun, engaging whiz-bang thing for them that before didn't exist. So now they have to almost create a new job for it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. A lot of the data that's very basic that exists tells us a lot, and that really specific and more sophisticated data collection is really cool to think about, and I can totally see how it would be helpful, but it may not be immediately practical. And I do want to defend the Chapman students. I'm telling you, they do a great job. Go side by side. They're not using Ricos. They have proper, good setups, and they produce very high production value stuff. So take a look. I know I'm a salesperson for them right now. That wasn't the intention. I'm supposed to. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, Rico's down and dirty if you want to do it.
Go ahead, Brandon.
So just to extend that idea of kind of an experience that somebody's doing virtually, working with a country right now who it's kind of a destination spot, and they don't have as many people as they would like coming to their country year over year. And they're working to build out like this virtual experience and going to track kind of where people spend the most time on this, on this virtual tour experience that they're building. They dump the app inside of the store. They could obviously click or track, the number of downloads and the number of views of the different areas of the virtual world that they put together. But there are no hard metrics right now. They're going to see what they get. Yeah. They're going to comb it, and they're going to try to iterate based on what they see.
And for them, that's enough. I mean,
for now, but do you guys agree that if actually someone could sit down and walk them through an actual strategy of what they should measure and why?
But what's interesting is that you can measure everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely every single thing that does inside.
So since we don't want to
virtual
boil the
reality-
ocean, then how do you get them to focus on, what they really need to
Well,
focus on?
that's the great thing is whatever it is that you need them to focus on, or you can then do the analytics from there. So
And I'm harping on this because this is where I come in, because I already know where this is going to go. And I know, like, before we get to the fun stuff, because I am a creative at heart, it's like, what are we really trying to do? What are we really trying to, because, you're going to spend this kind of money on a real experience. Like, you want to really know where this is all going to end up. And I think you want to be able to control a narrative through a space and have the character, the point of view of the character change. I think one great example I saw, there was the thing for Patron bee, where they did the point of view of the bee. And the reason for this is because Patron's made by agave, right? And so the bee is a pollinator for the agave. So suddenly it's so connected. This story is like awesome, right? And so you start off with this like drone shot, you think, and then really it's the bee's point of view. And now the bee comes down, goes into the factory, and then it goes inside the factory because it can. It's a bee. It goes through this little hole, and now we're inside the whole factory of where they make Patron. And it goes around and it shows off their whole facility of how they make it, but it's not done in like a heavy-handed way, like we'll do our walkthrough. It's like an entertaining way. It's live action mixed with CG, and so you kind of have a blend of both. Obviously, when the bee goes through the door's like not there. They have to like paint it on later. That's the technical part, but it looks seamless. It's beautiful, and it's telling a narrative. And for me, it's like one of the more sophisticated things I've seen done in VR. So you guys should check that out. I think it's a good example. So let's open up to questions. Anybody have any questions about AR, VR? Everyone's stumped? Go ahead.
So obviously there's a lot of opportunity here for non-tech brands, like the grocery store example. What are some of the challenges you're seeing with adoption? So getting people to embrace the technology, use it, buy the tools, whatever that involves.
So the question was, how do we get brands to adopt this into the
consumers? Like, so you're
consumers?
people to adopt kind of even just the usage of the technology, like whether it's cardboard glasses or something else.
Sure. And anybody want to take that on?
So in my case, for a grocery store example, it's more operational as opposed to like the end consumer who places an order doesn't care that the person who made the order and like put all the stuff in the bags did it with this or did it with the old handheld device. They don't care that that grocery chain had to pay for that, refrigerator at the front of the store to keep their eggs cool so that they don't spoil over the 2 hours. So operational side is all about like, let's improve efficiency of the business. From an adoption side on the consumer side, I would think that kind of the transformative experience to get deeper brand loyalty from each of the individual consumers or fans of your brand would be a bigger thing. I think people know from all the commercials that are coming out about, AR and VR devices that it's here. Price points are high.
Cardboard's free.
Yeah,
Cardboard's free.
high-ish, and will be coming down as you make more of the devices and people learn how to put these things together more efficiently. Then you'll see prices go down and then adoption, I think, expand.
Do we agree that the adoption rate is pretty high when the content's awesome and entertaining and good?
I think it helps too with the social platforms, Facebook, 360, and even just for 360 video. And I know we've got a whole array of definitions, right? We have 360 video, and at what point does that become VR, and at what point does that become AR, and it's all this kind of blurry thing. But in the lowest common denominator, luckily the barrier to entry is pretty low for people who just want to interact with the content on Facebook and YouTube. They can do it right on their phones, right on their computer. One of the projects that we have an idea for at Chapman is a very common publication, a piece of print collateral that goes out to prospective students is called the View Book. Everybody gets it. And if you're an alumni, you probably have an alumni magazine from your university as well. So we've talked about the idea of sending a Chapman University branded Google Cardboard to all the prospective students with the View Book, for example, or to all the alumni if we want them to reconnect with the university. So if the barrier to entry being almost zero with the social platforms, just slightly above that is as a marketing department, you just have to allocate funds to sort of subsidize their adoption. And then the price just goes up from there. But that's also where it gets really cool. You get what you pay for, right? A little bit?
Yes, go ahead.
Talk about the experience. So you require about a $4,000 computer in terms of potential to really deliver the full experience of virtual reality versus what gets delivered on Google Glass. So what's a trade-off Because in production, you might produce high quality, but can it be rendered from the end user on a, at a giveaway? First giveaway was about 7 months ago or last year at a baseball game. It was written on the New York Times. That was the first time.
Yep.
But what type of experience is that versus going to a pod-like experience at a show with $4,000 computers?
There's still high quality fidelity even in YouTube. You can still broadcast at a 10, but it's only as good as the production quality. So if you've got a good camera rig and you've got great lighting, you can do a high definition video and it can be broadcast on YouTube and put through Google Glasses, and it won't have the same immersive feel as like an Oculus, because that's using an engine that's driving lag and all of this, so that it feels very, all one encompassing kind of experience, but the fidelity of them is still fairly close. And especially when you get into motion graphics, because then it's just as good as your rendering.
So if a brand or CMO making a decision to invest, what you're saying is that even if I invest $200,000 for the experience, the end user will get that even through a mechanism of $5 cardboard box.
Yeah, and it's even another
that's
platform
correct.
for branding.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Or through your camera on your iPhone.
Yeah.
And for the camera, he was saying that, do I need a $4,000 unit or can I use a cardboard? And the answer is yes. it's both. I mean, like that's not going to limit the user from.
It's pretty democratic now, which is awesome about it, and it's a great platform for telling those stories.
The augmented reality, when you're talking about, because obviously HoloLens and everything else is not quite here yet, but when you're just looking through your camera and the Pokemon Go, the gigantic success of that, I mean, that's a fantastic way to engage with augmented reality. Right now, you're going to get the adoption.
Yeah, and you can use your phone. You don't even need the glasses. The glasses enhances it for more of a three-dimensional effect.
Maybe it might make sense to deconstruct kind of. So if you have one of these things on, there's is it freestanding or do I need to connect to like another PC, like in the terms of an Oculus? How much does each of the different components cost? Am I able to interact with the content, or am I able to just consume it, right? So during the break, you guys saw me putting a dog on the table and like moving stuff and manipulating. So this is kind of a creator's object or creator type of device versus a pure consumption device that I put on. So there are a lot of different factors that you would take into consideration when purchasing either an AR device or VR device. But I agree with the panel that the content quality has to be super high, independent of what medium you're going to have your consumers consume it on.
You do the same interaction. I've had the experience of an 8-minute video done by production. FX, it was more of a proof of concept for virtual reality. The 8 minutes totally blew me away. So I'm moving, walking, interacting with it with my eyes and stuff. So can you do the same type of interaction on a Google Glass kind of?
You're saying you saw something that was really high quality that you loved, and
I had the experience of an 8-minute, like totally blown away by experience. Take a trip to Mars.
please understand, like you can load this up to YouTube or Facebook, and that's you're there.
You won't have the interactive elements of being able to touch something. There are kind of like states where you can click through different scenes, so you can advance and stop and pause, but it's just those basics. You can't like click on an object or move it.
There's a limit on the technology, maybe the interaction with what's driving it at that moment and how it's built to the user drives the experience.
But getting a client to adopt that is $4,000 worth the extra level of being able to interact with something, or can you just tell the story?
That's what I was looking for, just to understand that.
And I do have a question, like when would you guys recommend VR over AR? Besides budget, like what other factors play into VR versus AR?
For me, AR is more when I don't want to take the customer or the user out of their environment, and I want to layer on that level of information, especially when it comes to retail and brick and mortar, because there is a romanticism to having those tangible pieces, wearing the clothes, but if I change the color of the clothes in a magic mirror, I'm not taking away the feel of the garment or the way that I interact with it. In virtual reality, if I'm trying to tell these grand stories and I want to control a narrative or I want to add elements to that environment, then I'm probably pushing for VR.
Yeah, for us, it would be if we're off campus recruiting at different high schools and things like that, we'd go more VR. And if we have people visiting campus, maybe we'd go more AR. But to your question before, I think it kind of comes down to the scalability, the kind of making the cost scalable and using that in kind of the tactical marketing that you might do. And I've used us as an example. If we're going to do kind of a blanket, wide net to interact with a lot of people, we're probably just going to, go the YouTube 360 kind of YouTube or Facebook 360 approach. But if we're going to mail, for example, that piece like I was mentioning before, then we'll figure out what's the cost that we can do that with, and what of our population. If we can't send it to all, 40,000 alumni, then how do we decide which alumni to send that piece to? Then I could imagine a situation where we actually take a full, Vive or Oculus setup with us on the road to talk with a room full of valedictorians or something like that. You can do. You're right that it's a little bit you get what you pay for, but everybody else is also right there.
You can do multi-application, one development, making sure that you'll have it being able to play on YouTube, Google Cloud.
Yeah, if you're mindful of the output, while you're creating it, then you can make sure that it's an awesome experience on this expensive product, but you can still upload it to YouTube.
And we're talking a lot about a lot of techie stuff. I mean, I would say on the creative side, what tends to be missing that I see is a point of view. The point of view is has no point of view.
Well, the creative is only as good as strategy. So an element of great marketing is great creative, and an element of great creative is great strategy. And that goes to a question you had a very long time ago is how do you define what we should be tracking? That's part of the strategy. And that informs the creative. So when we're designing and developing creative, and no matter how beautiful it is, it has to kind of come back to that strategy.
Sir?
So quick thing, people keep saying Google Glass, but you mean Google Cardboard, right?
Google Cardboard, yeah.
Correct.
So Google Glass is very
Google Glass, what are you talking
Glasses.
about? I don't know. You must mean
Cardboard.
Snapchat glasses, right? That's what.
Sure. The other thing is, you're talking about...
There's a Vine glasses coming out soon.
So like the 360 video, for example, I think, a lot of companies, Samsung, Nikon, they're putting out really affordable 360-degree cameras that do 4K, they're calling it VR, and maybe that's the kind of way you would do some of the campus tours, things like that. I guess, are you seeing a potential for doing high quality at low cost? VR seems like it has to be this very expensive thing, but meanwhile, all these companies are putting out stuff, at VidCon, Samsung was pushing that camera to creators. A lot of the stuff that came out was actually horrible or make people sick. Do you see potential in growth with influencers and sort of bare bones production that works? And what are you seeing?
Yeah. So what we're talking about is user-generated content versus super high-end and everything in between.
Or even just brands doing it
Right.
themselves, but cheaper.
We kind of think of it the same way as video. You can spend a lot of money and a lot of time. You can get, techno cranes and all of this stuff to make this really expensive, really amazing video. And all that stuff takes time, of course, to do. But if our brand, if our Instagram account wants to send a really quick video of an event that they're at, of course, there's no time and budget for all that. So we're just going to hit record for a second on the phone and then send that out as a brand impression for our community. So I think the same is true with VR and 360 video and that type of thing. Depending on what your goals are for that particular piece, especially if you're boiling it into a content marketing or an inbound marketing strategy, you may opt to go, Google Jump or get this Facebook camera that, is open source and you can spend $20,000 building. Or for really fast, quick to share content, you may just grab a Theta S and, share it quickly.
Yeah, I think even just the 6-rig GoPro system, it does amazing quality and user-generated content. I guess they're Instagram celebrities now could buy that rig if they're resourceful and knock our socks off. It's pretty low entry.
I guess what I'm wondering is in a nutshell, what works and what doesn't work? Is there a golden rule, don't do this, do this?
He wants to know if there's a golden rule, if there's a best practice. I'm going to say this. My friend Chris Milk, who started Verse Within, I think he said there was about 2 or 3 weeks of content if you put it all back to back, which is nothing, right, in VR. So we are really in ground zero, and we're all figuring it out. And that's why I think a lot of people are saying get some cameras in your hands and go.
Are you only inquiring about stuff that involves cameras and filming, or are you asking about full immersive, digital experiences?
What I'm wondering is are there are already things where you're like, this definitely doesn't work with a Samsung VR 360. This does work. Like narrative maybe doesn't work. Definitely you need a tripod because like people get sick if it moves around. I mean, are there things you're starting to...
You need a tripod. You need a tripod.
That's a huge question. I mean, it's a great question. It's huge. It's like a day seminar of like, it's huge.
I guess what I'm asking is there anything you're seeing that is obviously bare bones, maybe user generated or small brain creative that works? Anything you've seen online that's cool?
I've seen some creative, like Theta S type stuff. But don't do the thing, you're totally right. Don't put it on the football player's helmet anymore and like strap it on there. This is going to be so awesome. Everyone will
I can take your question, but to finish this up, I think the less money you have, the better your story should be. I saw a simple music video that was done, and the camera just basically did back and forth, but it was really effective because it was 2 stories between a window, and it was going to one character and then another, and suddenly it was just a simple back and forth move, but it worked. And that there's an example that it's going to come back to your story, But when you have all the money in the world and like you want to get more sophisticated, like you want to do CG, you want to do 3D mixed with live action or however you want to do it.
And try to find good creative teams because it's a very it's like the early days of filmmaking, and you want to find people. It's every project is an experiment. You obviously want to try to align with creatives that have a good instinct and almost go into it looking to innovate.
Definitely a learning curve. You don't want to just kind of step into that. Last question of the evening.
Kind of ties into what you were talking about before. So I work for a social media marketing company, mostly community management, moderation, things like that strategy for our big brands on Facebook and Twitter. But we're expanding now into content, small things, graphics, images, things we can put together with our brand's assets. But if I'm going to go back to my company from this and say, hey, I learned a lot about VR and AR, where do I tell them to start incorporating that with our strategy that we're doing for our social media clients? Is it specialty? Is it based on industry? Is it something we should start incorporating with our overall content strategy for brands? Kind of curious where you see it going with social content.
Great question. I was waiting for that question like an hour ago.
I mean, my thing there is it's all about innovation. You can make something actually, and maybe only 5% of the world is going to see it, but 95% will hear about it. So given that we're at this early time, it's just great to encourage the brands that you're working with to be creative and experimental and to benefit from that. And if you do something awesome, then the impact is going to be, is going to be phenomenal.
I think right now the platform's yours to if you do something original, there's not much to talk about right now because it's so new that you will stand out right now. Remember when click rates on emails were 10 or 20% 20 years? It's something like that. Now they're no one wants to open an email. It's like that right now. And the opportunity is pretty big, I think.
Yeah, there's just to finish that out, this might have been 4 or 5 years ago. When was it? They brought virtual reality Tupac Shakur to I forgot what music festival it was.
Oh, you mean the hologram?
The hologram, right?
That was cool.
Holo Tupac.
Coachella.
It was the first time I had seen kind of a dead rapper on stage with real people. So I think depending on what products and what brands you're representing, there's some opportunity in this space for you to do some maybe first ever, done in the category type of stuff. But you definitely have to think out the box.
Yeah. Don't co-opt it like CNN did and make Hollow Will I Am.
So I want to thank everybody for speaking. Let's give them a round of applause.